Hi, I'm Dave Kale. Welcome to this Christian Business Insights podcast show where my goal is to provide you with practical, actionable ideas to help you create businesses and careers of excellence and at the same time multiply your influence for the kingdom. I have been a Christian in business for over 30 years, and I have personally and contractually consulted with over 500 different sales organizations. So in these podcasts, I combine the lessons that I have learned with an out-of-the-box experience and perspective on Christianity that you will find challenging. And we put that together to provide you with practical insights and ideas that you can use to live better and lead better. Welcome to the journey. Hi, this is Dave. So are you your own worst enemy? Well, that's what we're going to look at today. Some time ago, over lunch, one of my clients asked me one of the most profound questions I think I have ever been asked. And that's this. In your training, he asked, do you focus on instilling new skills into people, or do you focus on removing the internal hindrances to the use of the skills they already have? Wow. So, that's the kind of thing I think about, as a professional trainer and educator, but I had never met anyone else who thought about those kinds of things. Let me repeat the question because it really was, I think, a profound question. In your training, he asked, do you focus on instilling new skills into people, or do you focus on removing the internal hindrances to the use of the skills they already have? Well, this issue is, of course, at the very heart of every educator and trainer of adults. If our job is ultimately to change behavior, his question was more or less, what's the best way to change behavior in the adults with whom you work? Kind of reading between the lines there. Now, he was the head of an international nonprofit association, and the focus of the question was those social workers in his employment whom I was training in better communication skills. And the question is much broader than just that group of folks, and really, it can be applied to any adult occupation. Well, now, most of my work for the last 2 decades has been with salespeople, managers, and executives, and in that context, the question could be rephrased to this. Quote, what's the best way to change the behavior of a business person and unleash that person's potential? And that's the question I think I'd like for us to consider. What's the best way to change the behavior of a business person and unleash that person's potential? Okay, now let's make this personal. What holds you back? What is it that prevents you from achieving your potential? Is it a lack of skills? Or is it internal hindrances that keep you from performing at less than your optimum, or is it some combination of both? Now, before I share my opinion, let me share a couple of experiences that have colored that opinion. Here's one. My wife and I were in Soweto, the huge African township in the Johannesburg, South Africa area. On the day we were visiting there, the elementary school children were on strike. Yep, that's right. They were refusing to go to school. But even more curious was the reason they were on strike. They objected to being graded as individuals. Their rationale was either the whole class passes or the whole class fails. Who are you, a teacher, to single out one of us as better than another? Now, that tribal paradigm colored all their thinking and ruled their behavior. It doesn't take much thought to see the consequences of that paradigm. If no one is allowed or encouraged to rise up, then no one will try. The entire group will be brought down to the lowest common denominator. In that case, their futures will hold little promise. Their potential for achievement and personal growth will be imprisoned by a belief. While that certainly is a dramatic example of beliefs and paradigms limiting our efforts to unleash our potential, it is hardly the only one. How much different is that, I wonder from time to time, from the description which follows a predictable behavior in a sales training workshop. When it comes time to create questions in a small group or prepare for a role-playing exercise in the middle of a webinar or middle of a seminar or training workshop, predictably, 5% of the participants suddenly have to make a phone call or use the restroom, and basically they're opting out of the exercise. Now, really, was their bladder really bursting? Or was it that their ego was so fragile that they didn't want to risk having to actually perform in some small way in the presence of their colleagues? Could it be that their fragile ego serves the same function as the elementary student's tribal paradigm? Could they both be internal beliefs and attitudes that hold back their performance, preventing them from changing their behavior and reaching their potential? From my perspective, could it be that? Absolutely. As a seasoned educator with the experience of having worked with tens of thousands of salespeople, I have concluded that the biggest obstacles to our improved performance come not in the way of new skills we develop, but rather in the internal obstacles that clutter up our psyches. In other words, I can, for example, teach someone, say, the value of asking better questions. I can show them how to create better questions. I can help them gain an understanding of what constitutes a better question. I can assist them in creating and editing questions. I can even help them practice the act of asking better questions. So I can bring them to the point they've actually practiced. I cannot, however, overcome their internal obstacles. If they have, for example, a vision of themselves as the glad-handing, always ready for a new joke, life-of-the-party personality, then they won't see themselves as having the interest in the customer to drive the behavior that they have just learned. Their internal beliefs will trump their learned behavior. Now, that's not to negate the role of training. Certainly there are best practices in sales and every other profession, and a well-conceived training session is still one of the best ways to learn the best practices. And a training session from a gifted educator always whittles away at both ends of the spectrum, changing behavior by instilling new ideas and at the same time attacking internal obstacles. The real point of this podcast is personal. As an individual whose decisions will influence the course of your life, the question is, to what degree do you confront the internal obstacles that hold back your potential? From my experience, the world is full of people who never consider that the reason for the lack of achievement, prosperity, and fulfillment is inside themselves. They focus on the tactics, they complain about the customers and their bosses, they fill their days with low-value tasks, and spend most of their careers in a place of mediocrity of their own making. If you're going to unleash your potential, you must focus on removing the internal hindrances to your performance with the same energy and intentionality that you apply to gaining the skills and competencies of the best in your profession. Okay, that's it. We're done. Bye-bye.